Hello, my name is Katharina Pabst. Thank you for watching the recording of my NWAV 50 presentation. The title of my paper is The Influence of Local Affiliation on Co-occurrence, Evidence from Aroostook County English. Previous work has shown that individuals' place identity, or local affiliation, is an important predictor for linguistic variation. And while there are several studies which look at more than one variable, there's relatively little work on whether variants associated with local affiliation systematically co-vary in individual speakers' repertoires. This study will address this question. The data for this project comes from 4 small communities in northern Maine, specifically from speakers of what I refer to as Aroostook County English, an understudied variety spoken at the US-Canadian border. These communities are called Dyer Brook, Merrill, Oakfield, and Smyrna. Their approximate location is shown here with a green pin. Based on informal observations during data collection, 3 variables whose non-standard variants seem to be particularly common among speakers with high levels of local affiliation were analyzed, and those are was leveling in non-existential constructions, demonstrative them, and preterite come. The non-standard variants are highlighted in green here. Previous work has shown that users of these non-standard variants tend to have similar social profiles, with the non-standard variants being favored by men, older speakers, and those with less education. This should presumably facilitate systematic covariation. Based on my observations during fieldwork in Aroostook County, I hypothesized that all 3 non-standard variants would be favored among speakers with high local affiliation. I further hypothesized that speakers with high local affiliation would use all 3 non-standard variants in their interview in the first place, and that the usage rates would be correlated for speakers with high local affiliation. So individuals with high rates of was would also have high rates of them and come. To test these hypotheses, I recorded sociolinguistic interviews with 30 speakers from southern Aroostook County, stratified by age and gender presentation. The sample consists of 28 European Americans and 2 Native Americans. This mirrors the ethnic makeup of the communities, which overwhelmingly consist of white speakers. 29 of the speakers are cis, and 1 of them is a trans woman. For the analysis, her data was grouped with the other feminine-presenting speakers. One of the biggest methodological challenges was how to operationalize local affiliation, especially given that no one had conducted research in these communities in the past. Recent work by Sneller 2019 has convincingly argued that ideologies of place are best conceptualized as speakers' alignment with common discourses of what the area and the people who live there are like. To determine what the ideologies surrounding place are like in Aroostook County, I used thematic analysis to identify common themes in my interview data. I supplemented this with socio-historical information and ethnographic observations about the area. Using this approach, I identified 4 main ideologies. 1, that people from the county, and this is a phrase that my participants often used as a stand-in for people from the area, are hardworking and self-sufficient. 2, that they enjoy rural life and outdoor activities, especially hunting and fishing. 3, that they are down to earth and do not care what others think. And 4, that they are friendly and help each other in times of need. Originally, I was planning on following Sneller's approach of using a Likert scale for quantifying alignment with the themes I had identified. But when trying to apply this approach to my data, I often found it difficult to decide where exactly on a Likert scale a speaker should fall. So to avoid this issue, I decided to take a slightly different approach. Building on Roberts' 2016, I translated the ideologies I identified into yes or no questions. Each positive answer is associated with 1 point, and each negative answer with no points. So once the questions were finalized, I went through the transcribed interviews and used the data to assign each speaker a local affiliation score. The first 5 questions are based on the ideologies I identified in the interview data. Note that I separated hunting from other forms of outdoor activities since it seemed to have a special status, with many participants mentioning that they engaged in hunting to feed their families. The remaining 2 questions were inspired by Robert's original study and my own ethnographic observations. Roberts coded her data for whether participants made explicit positive comments about life in the area. My observations actually suggested that negative comments were more insightful because all speakers had at least some positive things to say. However, only a select few opened up about some of the issues in the area, such as lack of professional opportunities or drug abuse. I interpret this as a way for participants to distance themselves from local values and events. And to reflect this, I assigned 1 point to those individuals who focused on the positive aspects only, and 0 points to those who did not. The final question targets participants' dedication to the area. Many participants mentioned not ever wanting to live anywhere else, but others admitted that they mostly stayed to be close to family or because they could not afford to move. To get at the difference between these groups, the question asks whether participants ever spend a significant amount of time outside of northern Maine. This slide shows the distribution of local affiliation scores by gender presentation, with feminine presenting speakers in orange and masculine presenting speakers in green. As the figure on this slide demonstrates, masculine presenting participants have slightly higher scores than feminine presenting participants. I also coded the data for the speaker who uttered the token, their age, gender presentation, and level of education. Furthermore, I coded the data for a variety of feature-specific linguistic factors, which had been shown to influence their realization in previous work. In the interest of time, I won't discuss these factors in more detail here, but I would be happy to chat to you about this via email. As is often the case for morphosyntactic variables, the dataset was relatively small. In total, there were 624 tokens of was leveling, 239 tokens of demonstrative them, and 211 tokens of preterite come. Once all of the data was coded, I conducted an in-depth quantitative analysis of the data. Most of the features were too infrequent for mixed effects modeling. Because of this, I used conditional inference trees to investigate how the different social and linguistic factors operate together for each of the 3 features. The results showed that the non-standard variants was, them, and come are indeed favored by speakers with high local affiliation. But local affiliation interacts with the other factors in various ways. So for example, for non-standard was, it's mostly speakers without post-secondary education and with high local affiliation who use the non-standard variant. But for demonstrative them, only speakers with high local affiliation use this non-standard variant at all. This suggests that it would be very unlikely that speakers with high local affiliation would have very similar usage patterns across the board, as I had originally predicted. Next, I examined whether local affiliation is correlated with the number of non-standard variants participants use in their interviews. It turns out that there were actually only 8 speakers who used all 3 non-standard variants. The graph on the right shows the number of non-standard variant speakers had in their interview by their local affiliation score. The positive slope indicates that there is a correlation, and this is confirmed by a linear fixed effects regression, which shows that local affiliation is actually the only significant predictor for the number of features speakers use when all other social factors are being held constant. However, what is notable is that there are a number of speakers with high local affiliation scores that do not use any of the non-standard variants in their recording. And these are circled in green here. One thing that all of them have in common is that they have strong ties to the educational system, with 4 out of the 5 either being educators themselves or being married to educators. This suggests that education may influence the way speakers choose to express their local affiliation. Generally, usage rates for all 3 features vary widely, and rates are only correlated for was and them, suggesting that there is no uniform sociolect among speakers with high local affiliation. Now, you may wonder why some speakers in Aroostook County would use was, them, and come to index their local affiliation especially given that these non-standard variants are attested in vernacular varieties from all over the world, not just southern Aroostook County. Looking at data from Northern Ontario, Schlegel 2019 has argued that there is an indirect indexical link between typical rural qualities such as outdoorsiness, toughness, and disregard for mainstream norms, and non-standard morphosyntax. I argue that a similar link exists in Aroostook County, and that this link is at the root of the relationship between non-standardness and local affiliation. This would explain why high rates of non-standard variants are not just found in rural contexts like northern Maine or northern Ontario, but also in urban centers such as London, Sydney, and New York. It's not the specific location that matters, but speakers' desire to differentiate themselves from culturally dominant norms and expectations. In southern Aroostook County, this means distancing oneself from the politically dominant southern part of Maine and its institutions. Now, what do we make of all of this? I argue that the combination of non-standard was, them, and come indexes high local affiliation for some speakers, but their absence does not imply the opposite, as seen by the individuals who have high local affiliation scores but do not use any of the non-standard variants. This means that the combination of non-standard variants has a different social meaning from their absence. And this is actually very similar to the way that variants of the same variable can have non-complementary connotations. Looking at the realization of word final ing, for example, Campbell-Kibler 2011 found that speakers rated the ing pronunciation as more intelligent and educated as the in realization or neutral guys. But in was not rated the opposite way. Rather, it was seen as less formal and less likely to be gay than the ing pronunciation or neutral guys. Taken together, this suggests that the co-occurrence of linguistic features can be socially meaningful, even if rates of usage do not systematically co-vary. Thank you. Please get in touch if you have questions, comments, or suggestions. You can email me using the address on this slide or contact me on Twitter. This research has been supported by an Ontario Trillium Scholarship, an SGS Student Research Travel Grant, as well as generous support from Professor Sally A. Tagliamonte's Canada Research Chair in Variationist Sociolinguistics and the University of Toronto Department of Linguistics. These are my references. This is slide 1 of 4. This is slide 2 of 4. This is slide 3 of 4. And finally, this is slide 4 of 4.